Okay, great. Christina Bury, absent. Christy Belton,
Here.
Commissioner Hillary Cooper, Pat Dorsey, Paige Lewis, Director Matt McCombs,
Present.
Mark Morgan,
Here.
Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally,
Present.
Julie Stinsel,
Here.
Commissioner Ben Tisdale, and Sylvan White Skunk. So we do have 6 members, so that is quorum, which is great. And keep rolling.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, and happy Friday. And I wish you were up where I'm at. And I actually took some time to tour the East Troublesome burn scar yesterday and hiked through some of that. And up on the East Troublesome Thompson portion of the burn scar, I've been actually camping right next to that. So it's been interesting and watching some of the rain and how that runoff from the burn scar in Rocky has been very interesting and fascinating to watch live. So just wanted to share that with you. And it's interesting to see the hazard tree removal and the piles of, especially on the east side or the west side of Rocky in the park, all the piles of trees and some of the mitigation work. And that side is very fascinating to look at. So I just wanted to share that all with you. So anyway, hi, Hillary, welcome. So I will just want to say happy Friday, and let's go ahead and approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second. Christy.
Any further discussion? Anybody have any questions or concerns about the minutes? Great. Well, with that, all motions on the table. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, the minutes are approved. And we'll move on to our next agenda item. And I'm going to, actually, because I kind of put this on the agenda after Director McCombs brought this up, and I apologize, Director McCombs, for making you repeat yourself last week, but I was having trouble hearing you with some of the feedback and stuff. So I'm going to turn this over to you. We were going to talk about a couple of items that are on the wildlife, what the Wildfire Matters Interim Committee had suggested and put as their top 10. There is the meeting that I just left. There was some concern, and I didn't know this from actually my county, from Office of Emergency Management. So I'm assuming she's speaking for the whole area of that, but it was for the evacuation in and out bill that they had expressed concern with. That's not really one of our bills, but I just wanted to let you know there was some concern already expressed about one of the recommendations they made. But Matt, if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to let you had kind of brought this to the attention about our next steps and what we should talk about for those recommendations and next steps. And you had some great suggestions last week. So I kind of put this on the agenda so we could talk further about your suggestions last week.
Yeah. I'm like, what were my suggestions last week? They must have been so good. So I guess, there's a handful of things that we could do, I think, in this interim sort of period of time between when the committee pushes forward what their recommendations are and then thinks through what they want to advance, right? Acknowledging they can put 10 forward and then 5 will actually move forward in full consideration by the assembly. And so, one of the, I think, as I've been on the road all of this week, meeting with our Southwest area staff, and so I've been engaging with employees out in the world, and kind of getting a feel for all the different work that we're doing. In particular, we visited Gunnison and Montrose and Durango and Alamosa, and it was just reminding myself sort of how critical some of the work is that we're doing. So I think that what we should probably do at this period of time is at least have a sense. I'll be at the hearing when they do the voting, and this will be my first iteration in this role. And so I'm hoping that we can have some discussion today and not necessarily further prioritize, but at least have a sense from this group what it is that we're going to be most interested in seeing move forward. As I understand it, often if you're in the audience and you're a technical expert, it's likely that you can kind of get pulled into discussion. And so I thought it might be helpful for us to have some further dialogue on the issues that you want to make sure that we absolutely highlight it and move forward. So that was sort of what I was thinking about as this meeting came in on the agenda. And just so y'all know, I've got to jump back out of this call at 9 to go back to talk to some county commissioners about funding and grants and such. So just wanted y'all to know that. But that's kind of where my head was at. Can someone else remind me what brilliant things that I said last time that I may be forgetting?
No, I think that was it, that we should talk about prioritization. And welcome, Pat. And I agree with you, because I do think that one of those, and I'm gonna have to jump back on the other meeting too, just like Hillary, but one of those top priorities from that committee is going to be pushing out what WUI code, statewide WUI code. And so that would probably be one of them, I'm assuming, because the fire commission is really pushing that. It almost passed last year. So I'm assuming that's going to be one of those bills, one of the 5. So I think that we're really looking at 4. And I wanted to address Christie's question about our role works with the Wildfire Matters Committee. And Courtney and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, we are appointed by the governor, and so we directly report to the governor and also to the state legislature. And since the Wildfire Matters Committee is the legislators coming together in an interim committee to focus on certain areas, we send a report to them and to the governor. We are kind of reporting to them, so we're kind of independent committee, but we report and give our recommendations to them, give input. Am I covering that correctly, Matt and Courtney?
Thank you.
Correct. We do have a unique role statutorily to advise and provide expert recommendations and stakeholder-driven recommendations to the assembly and to the governor. So we do have a specific role to provide direction. And based on, again, my experience last year with the Fire Commission recommendations, there's a high likelihood that these recommendations are taken seriously and considered when the assembly meets in January. So we have great opportunities. So I think consolidating our perspectives and having our sort of the things that we really want to champion. And one of the other things that I remember discussing last time was about, we had kind of a suite of sort of pipeline, education, staffing, and a handful of bills kind of overlap, and then some of them sort of put it all together. So that's another place where I think if there's specific things that we want to ensure that the assembly is clear on as it relates to what we're recommending, that's another piece that we might have some discussion on today.
Mr. Morgan, you had your hand raised.
Yes. One other thing that I'm curious about, I think it was 2 or 3 meetings ago. I think it was you, Christy, that brought up the idea of truly low-hanging fruit and what could we do, possibly even without legislation, to make recommendations to move some of these things along. Maybe they didn't require legislation. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, she did bring that up, and she was I think you sent that out to us for us to look at, Christy, a little report, correct?
But I don't want that to get lost.
No.
Because I think that's something we need to address as well.
No, I agree. And I think getting the recommendations and input to the state legislatures and getting the report done before the end of August was kind of the priority. And so we had to kind of move that up because we had that timeline and deadlines to meet. But we can certainly put that on to our agendas for in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. It's up to you guys how soon you want to hear that. And Christy, I would maybe lean towards you and see how you like to present that. And we can put that on for one of the main items of the agenda if you'd like to do that in 2 weeks or you want to do it in 4 weeks. But I feel like with this, with that deadline and stuff and meeting in front of the committee, we had to make that the priority to get those ready. So
I agree totally. I just don't want to lose track of it.
I appreciate that. So so at the end of the meeting, how about when we talk about the next discussions, then we can put that on at the end of the meeting when we talk about next meetings and presenters and stuff. That's where I was looking for some of that suggestions was in the next item after this one. Does that work out for everybody? And Christy, what was your question?
So real quick, I was starting to type this out, but Matt McCombs all along has sort of recommended that we really whittle it down to just maybe 1 or 2 specific items. And I like that approach. I would suggest that we identify what we think are the two most important things and start to formulate that if we can, but also simultaneously, we could work on some of this non-legislative, low-hanging fruit type stuff. But because we have these deadlines with this wildfire matter review committee, I think if we have some pull, which is what it sounds like we do, some influence, maybe we can figure out what those two most important things are and really get behind that and get going on that.
I think that's great. And I think the deadline, when they're narrowing it down, is the next few. I think they've already pulled bill titles. My question to Courtney and Matt is, if we have some other ones that maybe they don't take, is it appropriate for us to reach out individually to other legislators to see if they want to carry one of the other ones as a commissioner or something separate?
I don't know the answer to that. I could definitely check with Alice Horgan, who's our legislative director, but maybe Director McCombs knows.
No, I mean, that's a fair question from one of our legislative policy analysts. Of just, again, there's going to be a lot of interaction, and the part of the tough part about this group is that because we're all appointed, and some of us, like myself, are on under statute, we have a specific responsibility about how much we do on our own and how much we do together. And so we'll have to just remind ourselves on what the rules of the road are. And I think that would be as the session comes near and after they've voted out the bills in this first interim, that we might come back, Courtney, around on some of what our roles and responsibilities are and how we advocate and engage with the legislature as individuals and as a body. But like I said, there'll be 5 bills that will move forward, and all 5 of those will be run. That I guarantee, based on my experience in the past. And so we just have to, I think, ensure that the things that are most important to this body are hopefully advanced as one of those 5. Is sort of where I'm at. What I guess I'm asking is, I would love to go into that next hearing and have a good sense of what's really important to this group that is move forward in those 5. So that if I've given the opportunity to speak, or if any of you are in attendance and have given the opportunity to speak, which again can happen in rapid fire, that we're nailing those ones that are most important.
I think you're correct. And I just wanted to clarify that because I know that we're getting close. And then I will be probably testifying on another bill that is important to Limerick County, is separate from this. But I would never blur those lines, but it'd be great to have that, kind of where the line is, but it'd be great to really clarify that for everyone else. So, but I think you're right. If we could have those 1 or 2, so we can kind of put all of our energy to being successful, that would be great. So Mr. Morgan, you had your hand raised as well.
Yes. Some of these seem to be tied incredibly close. One point that I was coming up with was that I've been pushing and pressuring for maximum utilization of the Good Neighbor Authority. And then in some discussion with some people around the state and stuff, Good Neighbor Authority doesn't do any good unless Matt has the staff in place to utilize it. And so that's a huge thing for me, but if we can't address the staffing issues, or is there a way that we can tie those together? And I guess, we can sit here as a committee and say, we ought to do this, and we ought to do this, and we ought to do this, but we got to have boots on the ground to get it done. And so I just throw that out there as a point. Some of these things that we're trying to accomplish, we have to have the people in place to get them done. And some of these agencies just don't have the people right now.
But we would need that Good Neighbor Authority, Matt, to be able to do that, right? So that we need to have both. And I'm not sure if we could tie them together, but that's a fair question. But the Good Neighbor Authority, would it have a fiscal note on it?
What it does is it takes funding and that allows the state to operate on federal ground and put up and do a bunch of these projects. But somewhere Matt has to have the staffing, the personnel through his system to be able to do it. And I kept beating the drum for Good Neighbor because I think we need that. I want to get it in his hands, and then I'm going, And I'm sure he's going, thanks, Mark, where's the guys to do this with? So I think we have to have that discussion.
So I'll just speak about, so transparently, this is a discussion that we're going to be having with the governor's office and some other forums around about capacity, and that like we've had incredible success with investments at both the state and federal level, but without without the appropriate amount of people on the ground to actually execute, it's very challenging to sort of land the opportunity. So that is one of the 10 bills which is an increase state Forest Service capacity to execute G&A agreements with U.S. Forest Service, the BLM, and so that could be one that this group could advance. And there is a title in the Healthy Forest Vibrant Communities Trust Fund that specifically addresses that. So dollars could be strategically invested under that title that would then allow the state Forest Service to increase capacity at the field level in areas where we have high opportunity for good neighbor authority, which would be, primarily, it would be everywhere really. The Fort Collins, the Fort Collins office, the Boulder and Golden office, the Gunnison and Montrose office, anywhere where there's an RMRI project, Chaffee County, and so anywhere, any of those places, we're already seeking to try to beef up capacity through partnerships with the feds, but they're struggling to find the will to make those investments themselves.
So I guess I'm hearing from the group, we keep, we're hearing from a few of us, but not everyone, that are maybe our first two focuses is capacity and G&A. Is that from the recommendation? So from those, so when we look at the 10 recommendations, can we specifically look at the 10 that are recommended that speak to that, and have those two? It sounds like those are two that a few of us have really focused on, but I'm looking to hear what Samantha, Julie, and Hillary, and Pat have to say. And can whoever's 970 the phone call, could they identify themselves so we know who else is on the call?
Selwyn White Skunk from the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe.
Wonderful. Welcome. We're so glad to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Good to be in.
Do you, sir, have the recommendations and know what have in front of you, know which list of information we're talking about? Would you like us to send that to you?
I do have it. I do have a copy.
Great. Great. Thank you. Just want to make sure you had what we're kind of talking about, things maybe not everyone has it in front of them. So I think really glad to have you here today. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
Julie.
Hi, yeah, just to address your, the question that you raised, I agree. I mean, it sounds as though the earlier discussions we were having on good neighbor agreement, we're bumping into that same issue, right? On the boots on the ground staffing level. And so getting clarity on that and sort of pushing that piece to get real effective work done on the ground. How do we do that? How do we do that quickly? I'm sorry, I shouldn't use the word incentivizing. Doing things to ensure that work can actually happen is I think pretty important. So, on the list, advancing that sounds important to me.
Yeah. Pat.
I was just going to say, I don't have the list in front of me, but it is consistent with what we've talked about in the past. And the one thing I would say is every conversation that we're in, they talk about workforce development and additional capacity to get the work done. So I think, it used to be we fought about money. Now there's a ton of federal money coming into the system and nobody can get the work done, right? So I think that's where our emphasis needs to be.
Samantha.
Yeah, I was going to say I completely agree. I mean, workforce comes up certainly across all sectors, but this has been an area where anytime we talk from the economic development side with folks that are in natural resources and doing lands management, their question for us is always, who's going to be the next group that takes over my position. And I think, you know, training and seeing the draft that Courtney and you sent over before this meeting, I think we're on the right track. But yeah, the question that I have along with everyone is, yeah, how do we move some of these others forward? And maybe it's after this first committee hearing, we have, you know, a greater conversation about that. But bottom line, I'm in support of workforce. I think it's a great thing to move forward with.
And so I'll let Courtney, I'll have you talk in this second, but I just want to remind everyone kind of the discussions that we have, and Hillary, I'll have you go after Courtney, is that we talked about since the beginning having one or two things that we get past that are very successful. So we can kind of, this is our first year, our first iteration. It's not that we're not going to take these other matters up. We can just come in right behind them, and then we're going to go ahead and focus on one or two things that we can really get done successfully, and then show how this Forest Health Council and this legislative committee can really kind of help focus and get good recommendations and good policy or good legislation passed. And then the rest of these are just some really important conversations. And I think we can continue as we go forward, since it looks like we still want to meet every 2 weeks. Though I probably have to miss one of those once in a while, but that we have that discussion about these other low-hanging fruit, other things that we can do that maybe is not legislatively, or maybe there are other smaller legislative things we can find there are ways to get done. But so I just wanted to kind of remind everybody, we could kind of keep talking about that this is the beginning. It's not the only things we're going to be focusing on. So Courtney, I'll go ahead and let you go, and then Hillary after Courtney.
Thanks, Jody. Yeah, I just wanted to speak to something that Christy brought up in the chat, that GNA is not one of the concepts that the Wildfire Matters Review Committee decided to draft to move forward. So that's, as you're saying, Jody, something we can continue to focus on, but it won't be one of the items that we like put our stamp on and say that this is the top priority.
And Courtney, could you drop that in the chat? I've been searching my inbox and I can't open the links without permission.
Yeah, let me upload that.
So if you could drop it in the chat, that'd be helpful. So I had thought that one of those 10 had been that capacity building, but it might have got buried in something else.
Sorry, so there is a capacity building, there's workforce development, but there wasn't specifically funding to GNA. Let me share this and try to make sure everyone with the link can look at it.
That's how I remembered it as well. And I was thinking, oh, that's a missing piece. So that's, I'm glad that Christy, you brought that up to have that as a discussion.
And one other thing, at the last meeting, Alice Cosgrove invited this committee to provide feedback on the workforce development draft bill. So until September 7th, she is going to be working with Carolyn Cosgrove from the State Forest Service and Representative Cutter to really finalize what that language is. And so if anyone from this committee or the committee as a whole wants to provide feedback on pieces of that bill concept that we really like or we think are important, we can also give that type of feedback to Alice and Carolyn.
That's just, and can we do that? And I'm sorry, Hillary, and I'm going to get to you in a second, and then Julie after Hillary. Is since we don't meet until after the 7th, how should we do that then? Are we going to have to do that as a group or individually?
Well, I think if we had a few items from this meeting that we wanted to share, we can do that, or individually we can share ideas with her. If more than one person gets together to talk about it, that's considered the meeting, like a meeting, and we have to follow all the public meeting regulations. So perhaps the best way is to write individual comments to Alice, or if in the last 20 minutes of this meeting there's anything people want to highlight as like the top priorities for that concept.
Okay, Hillary.
There we go. Thanks. And I just want to start by apologizing for not being here. It's been a while since I've had so many conflicts for a committee that I'm really committed to working with. So hopefully that'll change moving forward with these meeting times for me, for my schedule at least. And I'm doing my best to catch up, and am really really appreciate all the work that you guys have done in this short amount of time. It's an excellent amount of work and great reviews to the Wildfire Committee. And I do support the idea, all the things that have been said today. I think prioritizing workforce development is really important. I just want to emphasize what you just spoke to, Commissioner Shattuck McNally, and that is that I'm just struggling with this, with our title. We are the Forest Health Committee, and that to me means something different than completely focused on wildfire. That to me means more forward-looking as opposed to, this sort of reactive state that we're in for wildfire because it's a rather desperate crisis situation. Forest Health is a bigger, broader concept to me of looking forward, looking at the conditions of our existing conditions of our forest, using the best science available to model future conditions of our forest, how they're adapting, how in the future we can help support forests that are not in such desperate, critical shape. And I think that there are non-legislative solutions that are available today, and mapping technology and vegetative analysis that is available today, especially through our partners at CSU, to build those tools. And if this committee isn't focused on that, I don't think there is any other committee in the state that would be focused on that. So I understand the deadlines for the legislation, and I support that, and will step in to help where I can on that. But I really would like to see us, and I will help put this together once we make those recommendations to the legislature, take the time to really talk about the future of our forests and not just reacting and responding to wildfire, but really the future of our forests, so we're not so desperate in the future, and we can help these conditions improve in the future and not just manage wildfire mitigation.
Thank you for those comments, Hillary. We're glad to have you back. I know we moved a lot, but we had a deadline and some things to do. And I get, again, that to my point, that this is just, those are conversations we can have as a Forest Health Council as a whole and into this legislative committee after we get kind of this initial one or two things going. So we can definitely, when we talk about topics, we can have that for something for the topics for the next few, the next meetings coming up. And so we can.
Uh-oh.
Is that her or is that us?
I think that's her.
Oh, bummer. She's out camping, so she's out in the woods. I'm not sure that's her actual background, but she is somewhere out in the woods. So
Yeah, maybe she'll pop back in, but maybe we can keep going then. Until then, Julie, do you want to share what you were going to say?
Sure. The thought I was having as we were talking about the capacity building and in sort of advancing that concept as well. And I too need to look at the list, and I'm blocked by Google, so I apologize. I have to send that to my personal. In any event, I guess the thought I was having, or the question maybe for those with a little more experience in this realm, is when I look at the draft bill concept on workforce development, it seems we could add language. I mean, and this is just sort of my novice, approach in this realm of legislation. I appreciate that they're talking in this particular bill advancement on workforce development, but it seems like the workforce development capacity building could be a very related issue. And is there some value to trying to react to this bill concept by adding in some additional capacity? So you've got the initial piece where you're talking about getting the education built up, and that's one piece of workforce development, but could you also bake in how do you capacity build with the folks who've got the education? How do you build the workforce on that next level? So you've got the piece where they need the education, they need the training, we need the programs built, but could you just add in there a next piece for the folks who already have the education? Just a question, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I would also probably look to the people who are closer to that industry to figure out how to bridge that gap. And maybe someone here can put some insights on that. Welcome, Commissioner.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. The Wi-Fi went down here at the coffee shop I drove down to, and the whole room went, the whole room explained. So it wasn't me, it's everyone else that's working remotely. So I was like, oh no. So I apologize, but we're back.
Yeah, Julie, do you want to share again? You had this really good idea about including capacity building in addition to workforce development, and then maybe you could just share that with Commissioner Shattuck McNally again.
Sure. The question I was asking for some of the more experienced folks in the legislative realm is, we have this concept on the table with workforce development, and that seems to address sort of the entry level problems of building the education system and getting the students there. But could you just layer on a piece that talks about how you build the workforce and build capacity once those folks are out, right? So you've got a layered approach, and maybe putting that in advances a stronger concept that we could get through that tackles a few of the pieces, which perhaps in the long term puts the bodies on the ground to support the GNA.
So I got to jump off here in just a second, but to respond to that real quick, that right, these are just concepts, right? And there's going to be an enormous amount of time to shape these concepts throughout the process. And so I think narrowing in on the things that we want to see these concepts evolve into is another great place to have this discussion. Actually, it'd been about a week and a half since I looked at that list, and I was like, oh, right, that's what we have to work with. And so if you guys could sort of consider what are those key concepts that you want to see move forward, and just get that kind of agreed upon by the time this conversation is over today in advance of next week's meeting, that would be super helpful. So those that are in the room can ensure that, you know, the Forest Health Advisory Council met based on the 10 that you advanced, and here's some things that we think would be really important. What I'm hearing, what I would feel comfortable representing at this point, is this committee is firmly committed to growing capacity through workforce development and increasing capacity in the agencies that have responsibility for executing these programs. So does everybody feel good about that?
Absolutely.
So that's a good one. So that one, and I think putting sort of that internship, workforce development, and then also the simulator, you know, that's another one where we could be like, well, it could potentially go together if you're going to increase funding to expand programming at Front Range Community College or other community colleges in the state. Locating those simulators in the same place would make sense. So those could potentially come together. Does everybody feel good about that? So to Hillary's point, and this is completely naked self-interest. Rep. Valdez did push the nursery into the conversation, and we only got half the funding we requested. And I would add that the IRA that Congress just passed dumped $1.5 billion into planting when they had already dumped another $230 million under the previous bill. So the governor's going to be at the nursery on Wednesday of next week, which is why you might hear a pressure washer in the background, and why I'm in my work clothes is because we're cleaning it up for his visit. So that's one that, you know, I don't want to represent this group, but that I'll be advocating for behind, because reforestation and the state nursery is a huge asset. And I think that if this group would be willing to continue to hammer that home, that it might be helpful to get that second tranche of dollars in this year's bill, and allow the state nursery to go kind of get ready, be prepared to be a major player in both urban and community forestry, but also in reforestation and recovery and post-wildfire. So how do you guys, I mean, I'm just putting that out there, that I'm going to be advocating for that one-to-one on behalf of the agency. But I just wanted to know, is that of any importance to this group?
Well, I think it was part of our in our top 10, right? And so it made onto our thing. So it was in our bigger, longer list. We just had to narrow it down. So I think it did come on the list. And Matt, are you saying that you're presenting about our recommendations from these meetings next Friday?
No, but I'm going to be in the meeting, and as I understand it, if we're there and they have questions, they'll call us to the table to answer on behalf of either the agency or potentially the council. And I just want to be relatively prepared to advocate appropriately on behalf of this entity if called to do so.
Okay, thanks. And I'd love to know what time on Wednesday. So if I'm around, I'd like to pop in. So,
Oh, yeah, you bet. I'll let you know. I just got the final agenda and I'll shoot it over.
great.
And then last but not least, I think the one that is really important is that this group seems very settled that the WUI code board should be created under, I think I got a general sense that folks were interested in seeing this. And if the Forest Health Advisory Council and the Fire Commission continues to advocate, and I think the governor is actually already strongly behind it, even in last session, that's one that could potentially move forward. And I'm remembering what I just said last time, which was if we could attach ourselves to some successful legislation this year, that's a good thing for this group as we mature and continue to consolidate our influence and our knowledge and our expertise for the future. So that was another place where if you guys think that there's somewhere where we want to advocate strongly so that we can show some wins in the first sort of year of our existence under this new legislation that created this group and moved it into an advisory role, formal advisory role, that might be something we should think about as well, just being strategic so we can be influential going forward as well. And with that, I got to run back to this other meeting to get prepped, but feel free to shoot me an email later, Courtney, if there's in the minutes that I'm going to shoot. And Mr. Shattuck and Nally, I'll let you know in that governor's visit.
Thank you.
And I'll see some of you in a few minutes.
Great. Thank you. So I would love to put that on a spot that we should talk about, because that's not one of our recommendations, but it's coming from the Fire Commission and other groups to support that WUI code. So we should put that back up to the Forest Health Council as a whole if we want, because we can't do that as a committee, but we could we didn't make that as one of our recommendations, but as a Forest Health Council as a whole, should we support that WUI code and come out and behind it? And so I think we should put that in for the whole council, because that's leveraging kind of resources too, is if we're going to support other groups' ideas. So I just want to make sure, is anyone on this call right now, and then Hillary, you're next, have a strong opposing to having the state WUI code? Anyone strongly opposed to it? Just kind of raise, okay.
I wouldn't
Okay.
say opposed to it. I just have questions about it. There are certain pieces that I don't understand well enough to know whether I have concerns. So it's something I need to dig into.
So what we can do is we can have one of those commissioners that worked on that very strongly last year, maybe Leslie Dahlkemper, Commissioner Dahlkemper or something. Maybe they can come on at our next meeting and just for a few minutes and explain it to us. So would that work?
I think that would be great. I put a note there to discuss it when you ask for topics on.
Cool. All right, Commissioner Cooper.
Thanks. Just quick response to that, the WUI code. The recommendation right now is that it would form a board to, come up with some kind of WUI code. So it was basically form a process to then have substantial input to come up with a WUI code. I'm struggling, same with Christy, on how a WUI code relates to forest health. I understand the, wildfire forest health concept. I just am struggling with, us getting out of our lane. I also really appreciate Matt McComb's, heads up. We need to show some success. I think there's an opportunity for that. I think this workforce bill, if we draft some really reasonable recommendations, use existing capacity, existing organizations, et cetera. So make a reasonable request that uses sort of work that's already being done and more support for that work. I think that has a good potential of success, especially with workforce issues today. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to come up with some non-legislative solutions. I think lawmakers really appreciate when we come up with solutions that don't require, more funding, and they take advantage of existing funding. One of the things that we're seeing is we have been advocating for this funding for several years now. We were very successful last year in advocating for a substantial amount of funding increase. Now we actually have to use that funding. And there is a danger of not enough demand to use that funding because of the capacity and all of those issues that we already talked about. That's not going to look good. And that's going to make it even more challenging for us to come up with funding in the future. So I think we can come up with ideas that take advantage of that existing funding. And I on that note, I would like to kind of put out, sorry to be a broken record, but I'm not completely clear on the timelines here. I know they're very quickly approaching, but I would like to put together some language, or I volunteer to put together some language on this idea of, really an analysis of forest health across the state, or a tool, a GIS optimization, a mapping tool, a vegetation analysis, whatever it is. It's taking advantage of technology that we already have. It's taking advantage of a state partner in CSU and the State Forest Service, and potentially put together some language. The funding may already be there, and I need to spend a little more time to sort of examine if it's already there. But if there's an opportunity to add some language into the capacity building, so this would be science capacity, into the shall we call it the capacity building bill, workforce and capacity building bill. Just wanted to throw that out there to see if I would have support to at least draft some simple language on that to bring back to the group.
So Hillary, I think that would also be a conversation we'd have to have with the full council as a whole, because the full council voted on these recommendations already. And so as we go forward, I think that would be a conversation we'd have to have as a council of full. I agree with you that we have to look at, these are these short-term things we're looking at, and we have to look at the long-term issues as well. And I think it's something that we can have, as a further conversation, but this group wouldn't be able to, we could recommend it, but it would have to be the full council that would have to vote to whether to add that on or not, if that makes sense. So we had to kind of vote it. We had to bring recommendations to the full Forest Health Council. And then we had a quick meeting in the beginning of August, I believe. And we voted on those recommendations, and the full council voted on, the full Forest Health Council voted on those recommendations. And then I presented, along with the help with Director McCombs, to the Wildfire Matters Committee. And then they took our recommendations, and they have these bill concepts they're pulling. And so that's kind of where we're at. And the deadline for the report to the governor is at the end of this month, I believe. Is that right, Courtney? There's a report to the legislature, the governor, that we have to give a report to.
The governor, we had in August. That was like our goal deadline, but we realized we're not going to be able to get it out by the end of August, so it's going to be probably mid-September.
Yeah, so those are the deadlines that we have. And then right now, working with the bill sponsors is where we're at. But I think that would be, we can put that as a conversation we can have in this committee, but we can't really tack that on to the recommendations, but the whole council would have to vote on that. But we can certainly discuss that in this committee. That is something you'd like to bring, have a, talk about it here, but we couldn't tack it on to the others because that wasn't part of the full council's recommendations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks for that reminder. I was on the beginning of that call and then had to jump on a plane for the actual vote. So can you remind me of, oh shoot, just lost my train of thought.
So Hillary,
the timeline, I guess I heard that.
So Hillary, can I just, as
ahead.
timing wise, because I know Christy has her hand and we're almost out of time for our meeting and we have to get these recommendations done. Is that something that you could call and talk to Courtney about with the timeline and stuff, since you and I can't talk because that could be considered an open meeting? But if we wanted to talk, I think Courtney, we could schedule a talk. We can go ahead and put on a schedule. You and I could sit down and talk and put that on a calendar so we can publicly disclose that you and I are going to talk about this. So if you want to do that, we can publicly tell Courtney that we're going to have a conversation about these items, and anyone wants to join that, we could have a discussion about that. We can publicly notice that. Is that correct, Courtney?
Whoa. Yeah, that's correct. If we make notice that you two are going to be having a meeting, anyone is invited, you can do that, or Hillary, you and I can.
So let's do that. Would that work?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost out of time and we have to come up with I see a bunch of ideas in the chat, but Chrissy, go ahead real quick, and then we need to come up with these couple of ones that we have to have ready for in case they ask questions next week. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Two points I wanted to make. WUI, that they're talking about regulation type stuff. I don't want to be involved in that. I don't support that. And I think it should be a county by county thing. We are a state body, is my understanding. I do not support getting involved in anything having to do with WUI, simply because it's a regulatory issue, and I'm not a fan of that. Secondly, Hillary, I've had some of the same thoughts that you have about like our overall mission and overall forest health, but the way that I see it and why I feel like we have some of this sense of urgency for things that are more reactive maybe is I kind of look at it like if I had, say, a terminal disease, you almost have to treat that terminal disease right away. And the broader health statement doesn't really matter. Like if I have a terminal disease, I'm not quite as worried about what vitamins I'm taking every day for my future health. So I see our forest health as more of an urgent issue. And then maybe, in between all these meetings, after the deadlines pass, we can start to work on some longer term stuff. That's just my perspective on that.
Thank you, Christy. I think you're spot on. So with that, we're out of time almost. So I want to go back to, we think that the first one or two priorities is the worker capacity. I think Julie's idea is excellent, that we can somehow maybe expand on that. So once they're through the program, maybe that's that paid internship, or how do we get them from the certificate or associate degree at Fort Range or whoever is that program, because I hear Pueblo's wanting to get maybe two. And then how do we get them from there and into the workforce? And so we need to build on that. So it sounds like that's the one that we're kind of focusing on. What Matt has brought up that he's going to be ready to talk about? Is that still a thumbs up? Okay, so should we take a vote then, just so we have a formal recommendation? Yes, Hillary.
Quick clarification. Matt said something about simulation, or he said a second thing, and I didn't understand what he was saying. Is that would be some of the recommendation about the simulation machines, and that would be built in. Those are the details, the granular details of these bills. So that's ongoing support for workforce,
right? And so that's granulating into the bill. These we're staying high level of the concept, right? These are pieces that we've talked about. So that would be our recommendation, is focused on the workforce education, but build in that next, like Julie said, of that bridging, or the tiered. I think you used tiered response, Julie. Is that correct? So So in the interest of time, sorry to rush you, but we try to stick. We have that time. We want to honor that. So can I have a motion that is our formal recommendation, and concept-wise is this tiered approach between workforce and capacity building, the tiered response?
I so move.
I second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand and say aye.
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 Is anyone opposed? Wonderful. Well, we have that formally as our formal thing. And then I see lots of suggestions, just to kind of, again, a matter of, we have an idea that they'd like to have our Representative Cutter come to their discussion. We want to have Christie's presentation on other ideas, and then Hillary's idea of further, she talked analysis, forest health analysis, mapping, data analysis for looking for way forward on forest health. And so I think you mentioned soil health or something like that, you said, Hillary. But so those are 3 items. So that to give, since we're only 40 minutes and we still have to have time to talk about this legislative work, each meeting, I believe, to be updates. I don't think we should take more than one of these per meeting. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, so Christy, since you've asked about this first for a long time, I think you should be the next meeting. And then I think we should have Rep Cutter come because the bill will be drafted by then. And then I think the third meeting, we should have Hillary. Does everyone agree with that? And not to put you off, Hillary, but we just, because I know we're going to need to talk to Rep Cutter, but I do think your discussion is important. Anybody have any disagreement with that cadence of meetings in that agenda for me to place in? Okay, with that, thank you all for your time. Any further questions, burning desires, or concerns? I'm so thrilled you're all here today. I wish you a great weekend, and I just really grateful for all your expertise, and I really appreciate everyone's speaking up and your engagement and speaking for what they feel about, and I appreciate the hard work of this committee. So you guys have a great weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you for taking time out of your vacation.
Yeah. Oh, I guess we need an agenda to adjourn the meeting. I'm sorry.
I would move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned at 9:23. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Courtney. So I'll kind of draft some of those next three agendas with those items in it.